Welcome to Brandstorm, the podcast that talks to the people behind America's brands. I'm Dan Trzynski, president of Platypus Advertising and Design.
And I'm Nancy Christopher, PR director at Platypus. Life tends to throw you curveballs. It's how you react to these setbacks that can determine your fate. Our guest knows that all too well. But more importantly, he found a way to turn lemon into lemonade. Please welcome Brandon Bruce, co-founder and COO of Cirrus Path, the software company that developed Cirrus Insight, an application that connects the customer relationship platform SalesForce with email and mobile devices. It's great to have you with us, Brandon.
Thanks a bunch for having me. Excited to be here.
So tell us about your company.
So I started Cirrus Insight with my co-founder, Ryan Huff, about 7 years ago. And credit to Ryan, he's the architect and designer of the application. And he really saw this gap in the market, which I think is the key for any beginning of an entrepreneurial journey, where he saw companies were using Salesforce and they were also starting to use Gmail. And there was no application to connect these two big cloud platforms. So companies wanted to be able to track the customer relationship over time through emails and calendar appointments. And so Ryan started building what became Cirrus Insight. So a nice plugin that sits inside the Chrome browser. Now we also have an Outlook plugin and really connects the user from their inbox to Salesforce. So you can get work done without switching screens. You can stay in your inbox all day, which is where you communicate with your customers. And meanwhile, you can update Salesforce with all the right information in the background.
Very cool, and I'm glad you mentioned your partner because I was wondering how you could ever go from being a lawyer who managed grant writing and fundraising efforts at a college to becoming a software developer. That was a big leap.
Yeah, it's funny. I always tell people I worked in the advancement department in higher education, and advancement and development in that world are sort of pseudonyms for fundraising, which itself is a pseudonym for sales. So I kind of had the frontline sales experience. So when Ryan started pitching the idea of, hey, I think this middleware that connects your calendar and your inbox with your customer relationship management platform, Salesforce, could be really important. I was like, yes, I'm experiencing that pain every day. It's hard to update your CRM and track relationships over time when it's not directly connected into the platform that you're using to communicate, namely your inbox. So when he pitched me the idea, I said, this sounds like it has promise. And my job really at that point was to figure out the go-to-market. He was building great software. How could we find a way to get it out into the hands of customers?
Tell us about CRMs and how I would just imagine the biggest fails are when a sales team doesn't update the information, kind of garbage in, garbage out. So how does yours actually bridge that?
Absolutely. I mean, the statistics are pretty stark when it comes to CRM. They're pretty expensive platforms. And obviously it takes a lot of time and energy to customize them and implement them. And unfortunately, over half of the companies that do end up not getting the results that they wanted. And the failure typically happens at the user adoption level. So even if you nail it in terms of we identified all our workflows and our process and our funnels, and we've got it all built out just the right way, even if it's done perfectly, which is a challenge in and of itself, it's very difficult to get users to embrace this new platform, right? We want you to now go over here and do this extra work, which oftentimes involves a lot of manual data entry. And that's not something any of us want to do, let alone salespeople who are really incentivized to work in sales, both from a personality fit as well as a compensation structure on building relationships, advancing relationships, closing sales. So it's difficult to tell those people, hey, instead of picking up the phone, instead of sending out those emails and trying to advance relationships, instead, why don't you spend time inside of a database and make sure all the contact information is up to date and that you copy and paste all of the emails that you've sent out last week. So what we tried to do is create something that saved salespeople time. And that's the number one review we get. Hey, thanks. This is saving me a lot of time so I can focus on what I do well. And then meanwhile, from the management side, we typically get reviews that say, this is great. We're finally getting value out of the CRM system we bought and implemented. Before, it just kind of sat there. Now we're really using it. Data's flowing in. Like the point you made before, it's a garbage in, garbage out system. Same thing, it's a value in, value out. You put a lot of good information in there, email sequences and calendar appointments, so forth, and you can start figuring out things like how many meetings do we have to have on average to close a sale. Using that type of intelligence can be really advantageous for taking your company to the next level.
Brandon, what platforms do you connect with?
So we really focus on Salesforce. We connect it with G Suite, so Gmail and Google Calendar. And then we also connect with Office 365 as well as Exchange, Outlook environments. So that covers pretty much 99+% of the market. You'll still find the occasional company that will be on a different email calendar platform like Lotus or something like that, but the vast majority are on Gmail and increasingly on Office 365 as companies move off of local Exchange environments.
I almost interrupted and joked and said, is anybody still on Lotus Notes out there?
It is interesting, right? So when we do user groups, like when we present at Salesforce user groups or at big conferences, usually if the room has 50 to 100 folks in it, there'll be some sort of split between Google and Microsoft. And then there'll be like one person there that uses Lotus. What's interesting, though, is that it's always a huge company, right? So they're on Lotus. They've been on there for over a decade. And they've stayed on it for a reason because the switching costs are still relatively high for them. And there's a lot of reasons not to move in a hurry.
And are they usually sitting by themselves somewhere in the room?
Right. I mean, it's kind of funny because they kind of realize that it's a pretty old brand, right? So they're like, yeah, we use Lotus. It's like they're admitting to something that they did wrong.
I hate to raise my hand and tell you, but...
Yeah, which is kind of funny because for those of us that have been in the industry for a while, Lotus is an extremely powerful platform. A lot of the stuff that you can do in Lotus in terms of writing process and just workflow and stuff kind of presaged the increase in adoption of CRMs in general. So it makes sense that some of these companies have stuck with it because of the switching costs to move 10, 15,000 employees to a new platform. Nevertheless, right, most of the modern companies, new startups, et cetera, are almost always going to go with G Suite or Office 365.
Exactly. Now, you built your company on top of the Salesforce ecosystem. In your opinion, is it better or is there more potential for growth and success to create a business within an industry category or to define a new one altogether?
It's a great question. I mean, I think we've seen great successes as well as failures doing it both ways. For us, the big advantage was we had a very defined path to market. So I always kind of go back to a couple things that I consider to be truths. One, business is hard. Two, even great software can have a difficult time finding a path to paying customers. That's why there's so much great freeware and shareware out on the market, which is a perfectly acceptable way to get good ideas out in the world. In our case, we liked the idea of making a company, having revenue, having customers that paid us. And so how could we go about connecting with those customers? And for us, that meant launching on the SalesForce App Exchange, just like companies that make apps will launch on Google's Play Store or Apple's iTunes, et cetera, because it's the place where people go to buy stuff like that. So for us, launching on the App Exchange was a boon because in the early days, 80+% of our high qualified leads that would convert into customers came through the App Exchange. So it was by far our best go-to-market when we launched 7 years ago.
So you're rolling along and you become one of the fastest growing companies in the U.S. And then, as Nancy mentioned in the open, life throws you a curveball. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so that's and that goes to the risk of launching really in someone else's sandbox, right? It's their rules. They control it. So just as there have been apps where Apple decided to get into the space and then all of a sudden hundreds of millions of people or whatever that were using an app, the app goes away.
Yeah, that's
in our
bad.
case, we're on the SalesForce App Exchange, and then Salesforce had done an acquisition, which included an extension that had some email integration. And so the decision was, hey, we're not going to have Cirrus Insight on the App Exchange anymore. So we found ourselves one morning without a listing. Now, thankfully, we had 5-6 years of very good branding out in the market. So by that time, the vast majority of our leads were coming to us through word of mouth, directly through our website, through other channels. We were still getting leads from the App Exchange, but it was a far cry from what it was when we first launched. Some of the algorithms had changed, et cetera. Nevertheless, like you say, it was a significant curveball. And so it was, hey, we need to double down on some of these other channels that are working or that are showing promise because we can't rely on that channel that we launched on. And we knew that this was a possibility from the day that we launched 7 years ago. We knew that risk existed. But when it actually does happen, it's different than just knowing something's a risk until all of a sudden it becomes reality. And then you have to actually deal with it, right? You have to dust off all the contingency plans
Of course, yes.
that you came up with originally. But there was a precedent for it. We had seen, once Salesforce got into marketing, the Marketo app went off the App Exchange, the Eloqua app went off, the HubSpot app went off. So when Salesforce kind of jumped in a little bit to the email calendar integration, it was like, okay, this was not totally unexpected. Interestingly, now, fast forward, Dreamforce just happened. Dreamforce is Salesforce's big conference that they host every year. And one of the announcements they made was that their app that's in the marketplace called Salesforce Inbox will likely be going away. They didn't say a specific timeline for it, but they did indicate that it will go away, which we think is really interesting, right? So what does that mean for us? We think it's great. We think it's great for us. It's good for our market. Salesforce has been a great partner of ours since the beginning. We still get a lot of leads and referrals from them, even though they have an app in the market. Our app has very specific strengths. So their team still knows to send us those leads because we can better serve those customers. So now the fact that Salesforce Inbox is going away per their announcement, we think there's this renewed opening for maybe we still won't be listed on the App Exchange, but we anticipate there'll be even more referrals coming our way.
At least this time they told you what they were going to do.
Yeah, right. I mean, it was a general announcement, so it's we're there obviously with a big presence at Dreamforce, and so it was interesting for us to hear. So, which is to say, kind of interestingly, sometimes it's a curveball and the ball is moving away from you, but it's possible over time that it will curve back into the strike zone. So what we're seeing here, 2-3 years later, is maybe a new opportunity.
So this really was just a curveball. It wasn't devastation to your company.
No, thankfully not. I mean, I think for some, like if you are an app for iOS and Apple removes you from the store, I'm not in that industry, but I think it's pretty much over, right? I mean, that is the only way for you to get installed on a phone. For us, we're an API partner of Salesforce. Customers connect to us through the API, which they've bought through their subscription. So it's not a requirement that we're listed on any particular directory of apps. Anyone can use our platform as long as they use Salesforce and Gmail or Outlook. So yes, there was a big advantage to having our listing out there because we had over 2,000 reviews. We were the third most reviewed app on the App Exchange of all time behind DocuSign and Adobe Sign. So there was just a lot of goodwill that goes along with that many positive customer reviews. We still have copies of those reviews. They're just not live on this very high SEO page ranked site that Salesforce owns. So that was the downside. But yeah, thankfully we had built out some other paths to market by that time.
You mentioned, we had to dust off our contingency plans. Did you go through any type of process knowing that this could happen to you and sit down and say, if this happens, here's what we're going to do? Do you have any advice for companies that, should be doing that type of thing and looking at their business?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it in some respects is analogous for those of us that are in the tech industry to, a lot of our customers will request a disaster recovery plan, which is always oriented around technology, right? What happens if the data center gets knocked offline? What happens if your server motherboard gets fried? Like, then what? Where does the data go? How is it encrypted? How is it protected? How long will it take you to get back online? I think it's useful to go through the same exercise from a go-to-market perspective. So if you think about the old days, right, we get our goods to market on the river. Well, what if the river dries up? What if someone dams the river? How do you get it there? Can you take it?
There's a leak in the boat.
Yeah, exactly. There's a leak in the boat. What's going to happen? Do you just lose all your product and then the company goes bust, or are you able to move it to train or take it by horse buggy, et cetera? So, slightly tortured analogy, but nevertheless, it's okay. If this channel goes away, then can we rely more on the partnerships that we've developed with 500 plus Salesforce consulting partners? Can we quickly drive more people to our referral program? Can we increase our paid ad spend to compensate for some of the goodwill we got by having 2,000 reviews online? Can we send better and more targeted emails that really highlight our competitive advantages against the product that Salesforce is offering? Because for us, even more so than losing the listing, was simply the need to now get in front of people and say, here's what's available in the market and here's how we think we differentiate. And before that time, that was always important with other apps that were in our space, but we never had to do that with respect to Salesforce itself. And so that was the new exercise, is to sort of try to craft the right language around, hey, we rely on Salesforce. We built our entire business on Salesforce. We've got great relationships with the Salesforce team. However, we also do compete. And so here are ways where if you're a customer that needs X, Y, and Z, we provide that and they don't. And therefore you want to choose us. But doing so in a thoughtful and honestly in a careful way, so that because we don't want to alienate, obviously the platform that we're built on.
Brandon, you've been on the Inc. 5000 list 3 years running. What's your secret to sustainability?
Well, it's a great question. I always share with people, the trick in some respects to getting on the Inc. 500 list in the first place is apply as early as possible. because it's based on growth rate, right? So, for those that remember middle school math, it's better to start with a real small number. And then if you can grow that a little bit, the percentage change can be pretty big. So thankfully, we did think to apply the first year, and we got on the list and surprised ourselves by getting such a great ranking. But so what, right? It's a gold star. But the great thing about it was it created a lot of goodwill in the market. Our customers were happy to see it. Our partners were excited for us. Most importantly, it was a great kick for the team. It was like, okay, we're investing all this time, energy, enthusiasm in this company, and it's being kind of validated in some respects, or at least recognized by this famous ink brand. I think on the sustainability side, look, and everyone, I think almost everyone would say the same thing. From the entrepreneur's perspective, the founder's perspective, it's been finding really great people to join our team that are excited to be here and that are curious to see what's next. Because if people are excited to see, like, gosh, we're here today, where could we get next year? It's that sort of question mark that, what's on top of the mountain? I don't know. I guess we should go look. That I think has kept us on the list the ensuing 2 years.
I had to laugh at the start of your answer when you were talking about math. I looked over at Dan. I know he was laughing too. When it comes to math, I am not smarter than a fifth grader. So
that's okay. Hey, look,
it's a
for
fault
most
of
of
mine.
us,
You're a
most of
writer.
us in business, that's all we need to know.
Right. You're a writer. So in addition to Cirrus Insight, your company also likes to give young professionals a place to launch startups. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think one of the neat things that's been validating for me and Ryan early on, we kind of said, well, what's our ideal employee profile, right? Here are traits like, curiosity, enthusiasm, capacity for hard work, excitement, et cetera. But we also realized like one of the neatest profiles is, people that are interested in starting their own companies at some point in the future. So they can join with us, see the mistakes we make so they don't have to make the same ones, but also see the things that we all create together that work. And that becomes their playbook going forward. And so it's been neat to see. We've had a handful, literally, of folks that have worked with us for 2, 3, 4, 5 years that have then spun off and created their own startups. And many of them are having great success today. And so on the one hand, that's really hard as a founder to have these great folks basically raise their hand and say, I'm ready. I'm going to go out and do it. Because it's like, oh, keep doing it with us. We're doing great. But on the other hand, it's kind of nice to say, oh, yes, that's right. It was the same traits that we saw that made us want to hire you in the first place that now you're taking out into the world to start your own company. And so we've always tried to be supportive of those folks, and it's fun mostly just to be on the sidelines cheering them on.
Yeah, that's kind of bittersweet.
It is. But it is cool to see them now. Several of them have their own companies. They've got great traction. They're hiring their own employees now. And so in any geography, whether it's, Silicon Valley with Fairchild Semiconductor back in the early days, or Austin with Dell Computer, et cetera, you've got these huge successes that then, as my son who plays Minecraft would say, that spawn all these other spin-off companies because they attract so many talented people and so much in the way of resources. Obviously, we're a tiny company by comparison, but even so, right, a company that employs 50, 60 people can still have this very positive impact on our communities in Knoxville, Tennessee, and Irvine, California, where we've been able to spin off several other companies that now have traction. And so the process kind of self-replenishes, if you will.
Are all of these tech companies?
It's a good question. I think most are digital marketing. One is a software as a service company. One is in the hemp business. So I guess that would be not necessarily tech, but certainly super popular. That's in a California market. So it varies. But yeah, I think all of them are either tech or tech enabled.
So what advice would you give these startups that you wish you had when you got Cirrus started?
I mean, I think as I look back, interestingly, some of the things that worked early on that I think still work now that are important is kind of the willingness and capacity to do some manual work. And what does that mean? I think it means that there are so many apps now that do things for us, and we've subscribed to dozens of them, and they're awesome because they didn't exist 7 years ago when we started. And now we can use them, and it saves us tremendous amount of time, effort, money, et cetera. That said, there are some things that just require, like the old Edison quote, right? A lot of people miss success because it dresses in overalls and looks like hard work. Some things just, there isn't an app for it, right? Some things you're just going to have to take a list of 1,000 phone numbers and just call down the list. And that's how it is. And so it's being willing to say, all right, so it's 1,000 numbers. I guess I can make 100 calls a day. It's going to take me 10 days. That's 2 weeks of working days. I'm going to start now.
Wow.
versus like, oh, this is too daunting. I don't know, like we'll need a power dialer for that. No, you don't need a power dialer. People have been making calls, cold calls since the beginning of the phone. So it's just time to sit down and do the work. And I think it's just not losing track of that. I think it's a requirement for most of the businesses, most of the entrepreneurs I've met and talked with. Often part of their early story is just a willingness to do a lot of the grunt work, if you will, that sometimes other people aren't willing to do.
Exactly. You've got to pay your roots first. And when I saw your picture, Brandon, I got to say, you look so young. I think you've gone a long way in your lifetime.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was probably a picture taken when I was younger.
Then you should update that.
Yeah, being in the
Photoshop.
tech world, where certainly most of our team is younger than I am. It's fun. It keeps things exciting. I think it keeps us all hustling.
Well, I suspect somebody is going to want to get in contact with you. So what's the best way to connect with you, Brandon?
Sure, lots of ways. I'm certainly on LinkedIn, so just Brandon Bruce on LinkedIn. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee. If anyone listening happens to come through Knoxville, we host a weekly company lunch every Friday, and we invite friends from the community, but also folks that are visiting to join us for lunch. So definitely hit us up there. And because we're a company that we do email, right? We sit in the inbox and help connect with CRM. Certainly email me. So it's just brandon@cirrusinsight.com, which from a brand perspective is not to be confused with, we've also been called over the years Cirrus Insight, which is kind of cool because it makes us feel really serious.
Right.
We were also a couple of years ago called Citrus Insight.
Right.
So we thought about going into like the orange juice futures business. And then last year I got introduced as an event as the COO of Cirrus Insight, which I thought
Some
sounds
days
like
it might be.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So, yeah, that sounds like an awesome company to work for, like Circus Analytics, right? How many people actually like the elephants? But yeah, so it's Cirrus Insight, Cirrus like the high wispy cloud, since we're a cloud software company.
Well, that's awesome, Brandon. And we'll have all of that in our show notes. And if you like what you've heard today, please don't forget to share, review, and subscribe to Brandstorm.
This is Dan Trzynski along with Nancy Christopher at Platypus Advertising and Design, an awesome company that creates perceptions that influence choice for a variety of regional, national, and even global brands on a daily basis. We hope you'll join us next week for another episode of Brandstorm.